Welcome to today's show, everybody. I hope you are doing well. My guest today is coming to us from sunny California, though it's early in the morning there for her. Katrina, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
We are excited to chat with you today. I always like to start off with just tell us a little bit about yourself, anything and everything you'd like to share.
Well, I'm Katrina. I live on the central coast of California. It's a little cloudy right now, but normally it's beautiful. I have two dogs that I love very much and a husband that I love very much. He's incredible. And we really enjoy hiking and camping, and that's usually what I'm up to if I'm not working. And for work, I'm a college admissions counselor.
Oh, cool. That's probably actually very exciting to see youngsters coming in excited to get college going.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Okay, good. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I really love hiking, and I haven't camped as much. I got to say, I think I've gotten a little too comfortable in other type of scenarios like Airbnbs. But my husband and I also really love to hike. Um, well, good. Well, let's chat a little bit about your story. Why don't you start by telling us, like, when do you remember, like, the first time you had maybe a sign or symptom or just not feeling well with endo?
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, I think I got my period around 12, so like junior high. And I don't
Mhm.
remember it starting out super painful. Like the first, I'd say year or two, I don't remember a lot of pain. I do remember though, when I was younger, even before starting my cycle, I remember telling my parents, like, I just don't feel good. And I wouldn't be able to like pinpoint what was wrong. So when I look back now, I'm like, maybe that was related. Maybe it was like fatigue. I'm not sure, but I remember thinking that I just don't feel good. I just don't feel good, but not being able to place it, which is
Sure.
hard for a parent because they're, where does it hurt? What's wrong? And you're just like, I just don't feel good. I don't know what to tell you. Um,
Right.
but then when I was in high school is when I started getting really bad, painful periods, just really painful cycles. And from there, the pain just sort of spread out from my period. So at first, it was just pain during my period. And then it was
Mhm.
pain for 5 days after my period, after I stopped bleeding. And then it was for 5 days before my period. And then it
Yeah.
got to the point where there was only, 3 or 4 days of the month that I wasn't in pain. And for me, it
And what
was,
type of pain? Yeah,
yeah,
what was the pain? It was like back pain, hip side.
it was like a dull ache when I wasn't actively bleeding. That was painful
Mhm.
cramps. But for the rest of the time, it was like a dull ache in my stomach. That's the only way that I could think to describe
Okay.
it.
Sure.
And it just felt like never ending at that point. And I was like 13, 14.
Right. So you're like in early high school, and so you're having this, and are you like, what do you do? Like, are you missing school during your cycle? And then what do you do on the other days to try and manage it?
I just remember I remember being in bed a lot. Like this is what I remember from that time is laying in my bed
Sure.
and in my dark, like with the blinds closed, like laying in my room, just like not wanting to do anything. Um,
Right.
and I was missing a lot of school, and because you just never I just never felt good, basically, and
Yeah. You
I
just
always
felt
had
like
this pain.
unwell.
Yeah,
Yeah.
all the
Yeah.
time.
And so you just did you live with it? Did you try and go see, like, I don't know, your pediatrician or like family doctor?
Yeah, I think that my parents sort of I think it was in my case, I think it was sort of obvious that it was related to my cycle because it kind of spread out from it. Like that was the initial issue.
Hmm.
And so I did go and see a gynecologist. And I'm trying to remember like the order of the gynecologist that I saw because I
Yeah,
saw
I
like
know. It's
three or
just
four.
so long.
Yeah. And I remember, and this is where I got really lucky, I think, in my story after hearing other people's stories, is that the first gynecologist that I went to said, "Oh, that sounds like endometriosis." But just
Wow.
because they knew what it was doesn't mean that they knew how to treat it.
Right.
So I believe it was that first doctor. I'm assuming they put me on birth control first, but that first doctor also ended up putting me on Lupron at 14. And so at
Wow.
14, I was put into chemical menopause, essentially.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
And so I'm 14 and I'm having like hot flashes and night sweats. And it was just a lot at that age to try to.
Yes. 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 Already such a challenging age. I feel like that the like 13 to 16 is the like just the worst because you're just trying to figure things out. Yeah. So how long were you on the Lupron for?
I only, I'm trying to remember because that's an injection, right? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah. I think
I
it
think
lasts like 3 or 6 months, I want to say.
I want to say I only got one injection because so
The side effects.
so they gave me the Lupron. I had the side effects, but it didn't do anything for my pain. Like I still felt the same way, plus the side effects.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'm not doing that again. And also just, the fact that they put me on it at 13 or 14 or however old I was, like you don't like the doctor's telling you this might help, so you do it. Like you're not going to question the doctor that's
Right.
telling you that when you're that age. And also that was in like 20 or like 2008 or 9, and
Yeah.
Instagram wasn't really a thing, so there
Yeah.
wasn't a lot of information out there. They give you, like, I
Sure.
remember getting a tiny little pamphlet, and it was like, this is endometriosis, and that was basically all of the information.
Right. Well, and that was what I was curious too, because obviously, yeah, 13, 14, it's hard to grasp what that even means when someone tells you you have this condition. But yeah, like you said, just finding the information. So you didn't know, obviously, at that point, like you got this pamphlet, okay, I take this medication and I'll be fine, is probably I mean, that's what I would have thought if that happened to me. So then what happened next? So you do the Lupron, you have the side effects and you stop doing it. Then what happened? And your pain's still there, so it didn't solve the problem. It just caused more issues for you.
Yeah, so I think I was kind of was like, I'm not going back to that doctor. Like I was like, I'm not happy with the way that this went down. So I ended up going to another doctor, and their response was just, let's try all these different birth controls. Let's try to get your pain managed. And I remember trying a lot of different pills, and then at one point I was on the pill and the shot, and I still had the pain. Like nothing, no, none of the birth control ever worked for me. And I know it works for some people, and that's awesome. But for me, it never worked. And so I felt like I was just constantly going back and trying another birth control until I just got to the point where I was like, this this isn't it's not working. It's not doing
Yeah.
anything for me. It's just making me more hormonal, when you're on the pill and the shot and you're a teenager and you're just all over the place.
Yeah, I was just about to say, and the roller coaster that comes along with like switching all of that and all the hormones and everything. Yeah, especially so throughout high school, you were kind of just in this cycle of trying new birth controls and doing all of that. And your cycles were still painful and you were still in pain every single day. Did you have any other symptoms besides pain? Like, did you have nausea or just, I know you said just a general not feeling well. Was there anything else now that you look back that you think could have been related?
I For me, I think one of my huge symptoms is fatigue. Like I just feel tired a lot. And I do think that that's related to the endo. Um, and
Yeah,
I probably had like some bowel stuff when I was a teenager. Now that I look back.
sure. Yeah, for
Mm-hmm.
sure. Okay, so throughout high school, you go through the cycle. What do you do? You said you put your foot down. You're like, I'm done. I'm done doing birth control. What happens after you do that?
So yeah, so at this point, I think I'm like a junior in high school. So I feel like I kind of put my foot down kind of fast. I was like, this isn't doing anything for me. Um, and I was missing all of this school. And I remember going. I was at school one day when I was able to go, and one of my teachers actually asked me, you've been missing a lot of class, what's wrong, or like prompting me to talk to her about it. And she was the only person at my high school, the only adult that actually reached out and tried to have that connection with me about it. And I told her, um, my doctor thinks that I have endometriosis. Like, do you know what that is? And we had a conversation about it, and she actually recommended a gynecologist for me, and that gynecologist is who performed my surgery.
Wow.
Yeah.
How incredible. And how kind of her to just reach out and check on you and then refer you to someone. Wow. Okay, so when did you have that was your junior year? Did you have surgery while you were in high school?
Yeah, so I was 16 when I had surgery, so I went to this doctor that my teacher had recommended, and I honestly, looking back on it, I can't thank her enough because he was incredible, especially going from the gynecologist that I had already had and then seeing him. And on the first visit, I explained my symptoms. I explained everything, that all the treatments, all the birth controls that I had tried and how it hadn't done anything. And on that first visit, he said, okay, well, I think you've explored all the pathways other than surgically treating it or surgically diagnosing it. So is that something that you would want to do? And I was like, yes. I'm tired of trying all these birth controls. I don't want to keep doing that. Like, I want to know if that's what it
Right.
is, and I want some relief from this pain.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh, so much at 16 too. Just like asking, him asking that and dealing with that. At this point, are you starting to understand like a little more about endo? Because I know I always say on the show, and people hear me say it all the time, I really didn't understand that it was like a chronic illness and that this was something I was going to have to continue to maintain. Like my first OBGYN, it sounded like, oh, you'll have a surgery and you'll be fine. And that's what I thought.
Yeah, I didn't understand it. And I don't think that just, and like I already said, there wasn't a lot of information out there. You couldn't really Google it, or you couldn't go on Facebook or maybe you could have at that point, but I couldn't at that point because I was like a teenager and I didn't know. I couldn't go on these Facebook groups and hear other
Right.
women's stories, um,
Sure.
or other people's stories. And so I don't think that I really understood what it
Yeah.
was. And
100%.
and it was really, I was going off of that little pamphlet that the first doctor gave me, and it was like, this is what we think it is,
Yeah.
and it may affect your fertility, and you're reading that at like 13, 14, and so now that's in your mind.
Right. Right. Okay, so you have surgery at 16.
Yeah, so I have surgery, and then also another thing that I didn't know about, like I didn't know excision ablation at that point. I didn't know anything about.
Of course, yes. It
Yeah,
took me years to learn that
yeah,
lesson.
same.
I had no
So
idea.
yeah, I didn't know anything about that, and I think in 2021, this last, like, a few years ago, I decided, because unfortunately my gynecologist is retired now, but I was like, I'm gonna get my medical records because I didn't have them as a teenager. I wasn't like, I want a record of my surgery. Like, I was
Of
like, I want to go
course.
home and be done with this.
At
um
16, all I was thinking about was like, how do I get a car and start driving? Like it's just, yeah, it's
yeah.
we've learned through doing. I totally understand where you're coming from. Okay, so you have surgery. How did
Yeah,
it go? How was it?
it went well. And so that's why I wanted to get my medical record too, because I was like, did I have ablation? Did I have excision? Like, I didn't know. And the doctor didn't, if he did tell me, I don't recall.
Sure.
And so in the medical notes, it says like excised endometriosis. And so now looking back at it, I'm like, oh, that's amazing. Like, I didn't even know.
Yeah.
And he wasn't an endometriosis specialist. He was a gynecologist that did gynecological surgeries. So I feel like I got really lucky that that's the doctor that I ended up with and that he was able
Yeah.
to excise it. And I didn't even know that that was amazing at the time, but it is. Um, so my pain got a lot better after the surgery. And that's the only surgery I've had to date. And it got a lot better, but endometriosis is it's not gone. So I still have some symptoms. I still have painful periods. I still have, there's some days where it hurts to get out of bed or it hurts to walk around. But overall, my pain is so much better and I don't have that dull ache that I had outside of my period time. I
Yeah.
still have painful cramps and fatigue and all that, but that dull ache went away and it has not come back so far.
Right. Yes. Yes.
So
That's
it
that's
definitely
great though.
improved. Yeah, it definitely improved my quality of life overall.
Good. Yeah. So do you feel like you were able to enjoy the rest of high school and like feel better and like do more? I don't know. Like such a young age. Did you feel like, okay, I can now have like a little more fun at like 17 and 18?
I don't know. At that point, I was kind of like super over high school. I hated high school just because
Yeah.
I was going through
Oh,
all of this, and no, like I
yeah,
didn't feel like any of my peers could relate to me because
for sure.
I'm never at school, and it was just I
Yeah.
ended up doing like after my surgery, I ended up doing independent study, and then I graduated early. So I was kind of like, I'm over this. I'm done with this place.
Yeah.
But
And
then,
that makes sense.
yeah,
Like some people at 16, they're like worried about, well, this, someone said this about, it's just you had to grow up really fast because you
yeah,
were dealing with this like pretty heavy situation at a young age and like having a surgery at 16. And yeah, I totally get it. And yeah, I had really good friends in high school, but they didn't understand the level too of like just pain.
yeah. And I think also for me, after I had my surgery, I feel like I kind of had this mentality like, hey, now I don't have to think about this and I can just move on. So I didn't really I didn't talk about it. I didn't talk about my endometriosis for years. And when somebody would
Yeah.
ask me, I'd be like, oh, I have a gynecological disease or I have a chronic illness. But I wouldn't I was afraid to name it, I think, like subconsciously.
Hmm. Hmm.
So so when, my peers, other teenagers are like, why are you always missing school? Like, like asking in not a
Yeah.
kind way. And I didn't want to talk about it at
In
all.
a judge, they were asking you kind of in a judgmental way, though they probably, the intent wasn't malicious, right? Like, but people, again, just due to the lack of awareness of the disease, people just don't understand the severity of it. So yeah, I understand. I totally understand. I did not talk about it for years either. And I didn't know, first off, I didn't know what it was or that I even had it until my 20s, but yeah, it's challenging. So that's what you bring up, a really good point for people who are listening. I'm sure there's a lot of people that haven't been comfortable talking about it openly, especially in those younger ages. It's very, very hard.
Yeah, and that was a huge
So
thing for me. So before I had my job now, I worked at Starbucks for 6.5 years. So I was on my feet like 40 hours a week, and that was a lot on my body. And I also have endometriosis, and so and it was just a lot, and I wasn't at that point I wasn't really talking about my endometriosis, and I think
Mhm.
it started to take a mental toll on me, or I know it did. And so here I am, running my little chronically ill body like ragged, working, and then also I realized that I was having mental health problems caused by my endometriosis, and the fact that I wasn't talking about it. The fact that I had never really accepted the fact that I have it or dealt with the mental aspect of it. And so I think when I would have a flare up or a really bad period, I would just get into this mental space where I would sort of spiral because my body doesn't feel good, and now it was attacking my mind as well. So I would be in pain, and then I would just sort of close off, and then all of my thoughts were negative about what I was feeling. So it's
Yeah.
like, and I think I would get into this mindset of like, I'm in so much pain. Why is this happening to me? Why am I feeling like this? And then you get into like, what if I'm infertile? And then it's like this spiral. And
Yeah.
so I would do that like almost every time I would have a flare up.
So
Bless you.
sorry. So sorry. Couldn't mute fast enough. It came on like a freight train. There's so much pollen here right now. And now we're laughing, but this is actually a really serious and good topic that you're bringing up, because I understand this. Like, sometimes I would feel pain and then I would start to spiral. Oh my gosh, what's wrong with me? Is it the endo, this, that? And like you said about not kind of openly talking about it, do you feel like you were like compartmentalizing it? So like you were avoiding, like you were having it, but you're almost like avoiding dealing with feeling it?
Definitely.
Or
I think I was avoiding, yeah, like the emotions around it. I was avoiding them, and then it was really negative. And so I remember just being in the back at work one day, and I think this is a good thing to touch on too, is like working and having endometriosis is really hard. Like there would be days where I would be in so much pain and I would start crying on the floor, or like I would have to go to the back and sit down.
Mhm.
And there's so many people with endometriosis that are in that position where they're working jobs that like are so hard on your body when you have endometriosis.
Yeah.
But I remember being at work, and I was in the back, and I must have been in a flare up or something. And I remember crying in the back, and I was like mopping or something, and I was like crying because I'm the kind of person that like I have ridiculous work ethic, and so I'm like I'm just gonna keep working when I'm sad. And so I remember crying, and I remember thinking to myself, I don't feel like myself. Like I okay, like I don't feel like myself, and I feel like the endometriosis is like taking over my mind.
Yeah. And that's a totally 100% valid feeling. I appreciate you being vulnerable with us and talking about that, because a lot of people feel that exact same way.
Ooh. And uh, and so I remember thinking to myself, I'm gonna go to therapy. Like I need to talk about this. And so I did, and 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 it was so good for me. And I think it was
Good.
just I had all of this, like you know that we all just sort of put up a front and we work, we go on about our lives through all the pain and through all of the mental struggles even too that come with it. And so it was just I needed to talk about all of those things that I hadn't talked about for, I think at that point it was in 2020 where I was like I need to go to therapy. So it had been over 10 years, or well, like about 10 years, that I had this, but I had never really processed the mental side of it, what it was doing to me mentally, or how I was responding mentally to having a chronic illness. And so I went and I just I said all of my fears that I had never really expressed to anyone, that had just been spiraling around in my head. And I really just named it, and that was so good for me. And I would urge anyone that feels like they're in that space that you can go and talk to someone, and you could talk to somebody that is not a family member. It's not your husband, it's not your boyfriend, it's not your best friend. It's an impartial person that can hear those thoughts, and they're not going to judge you for them, and they're not going to react in a way that you don't want them to react in, because I think that's a fear too, is you don't want to keep overwhelming the people in your life, or you don't want to complain all the time, even though you should because it sucks. But I think that that's a common fear. um, and I think one big thing that my therapist said to me, or that we came to together, is that I was trying to rationalize an irrational illness. Endometriosis is not rational. It doesn't make sense sometimes. Like, you can do the exact same thing every day and still have a flare up. You can eat something one day and be fine, and eat something the next day and have a flare up. And I think in my mind, I was trying to rationalize it, because I'm a very, like, that's the way my brain works. I was trying to figure it out, and I was trying to calm it down, and I was trying to suppress it. And I just, we came to the conclusion that that's kind of impossible sometimes, and you just have to live through it and process your emotions around it.
And give yourself a lot of self-compassion, right? So it's interesting that you said you're a really hard worker, because a lot of the people I talk to on this podcast and people with endo are the hardest workers I've ever met. They seriously are. And I think we also have to work even more and do even more, because we have this guilt of this chronic illness, and we've got to just keep forging forward and go, 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 when sometimes we should be resting. I love that you brought up therapy and having an unbiased, like, third party person that you can just let it all out to, that will give you tactics too to help process it all. I think I avoided dealing with the mental side of it for years. Jenna, who was on my podcast, made a journal, and I kept like opening the first page. It's where you just kind of journal about chronic illness, and like would just close it. I literally couldn't even open the first page to start writing things down. And recently I started writing in it. It's so healing, and we need to give ourselves self-compassion, and we need to talk about it. Like, actually, I do have this chronic illness, and I might need accommodations at work, and I might need these things. But sometimes I think it's really hard to admit to ourselves. I know I really, really struggled with that, being like a type A, like I can do anything. Really struggled with saying, no, actually, I need rest. And no, I can't. I worked retail, so I understand, very similar to like Starbucks. No, I have to go lay in the back room right now, or I have to go home. Like, and those things were very hard for me to admit. I felt like a failure. And I think that plays into it. I don't know if you felt like similar emotions like that, but like, that's how it was affecting me, is I just felt like I have to just keep pressing forward, which was probably just putting more stress and strain on my poor body that is sick, and it's not our fault that we're sick.
Yeah, and the mental things can affect you physically as well. And so you already have this chronic illness, and now you're also dealing with all the mental side of it, but then it's also straining your body even more because you're so stressed out about it. And yeah, I
Yeah.
remember one day I was driving to work, and I got like a really sharp pain, and I had to pull over on the side of the road and like breathe it out. And then I remember calling my boss and being like, I can't come into work today. And that was a huge deal for me, because normally I would just push through the pain.
Yeah.
And so I remember coming back home and being like, oh, I like, I was like, I did so good. Like, I stood up for myself and I came home and I'm gonna rest. And that was a big deal for me because yeah, I had been avoiding it sort of. I wasn't talking about it and I was just trying to push through like everything was fine. But it wasn't. And sometimes it's not, and that's okay.
Yeah. And that's, I think, with invisible illness is, and an illness like this that just doesn't have the awareness that others do, I think it puts us in this kind of bubble that's really hard for us to explain, for other people to understand. If you had a gaping, bleeding wound on your arm and you were like, I can't come to work today, everyone would understand. But I was listening to a podcast actually recently that mentioned this, and I don't even remember, I'll probably butcher what they were saying, but they were just saying, like, when you have an outward injury and people can see it, a broken leg, a broken arm, things like that, they understand, and people are running to hold the door for you and things like that. But when you have like an invisible illness, people don't believe you, people think you're making it up, and you then almost start to gaslight yourself and think that way too, like, no, I need to just push through, I'm fine, it's fine. Where again, if you had this, like, you had a cast on your leg, you would know that you had to sit down and rest it and elevate it. So I think that is, at least personally, that has been a very large struggle for me too, where I was actually second guessing myself. Oh, am I just being weak? Am I just being, you know, not working hard enough? Like, I started to question myself, which goes into mental health for me 100%.
Yeah, and
So, how,
being I remember
yeah.
being at work and this is like I started talking about it more. So I started telling my baristas like, "Oh, it's not normal. Like that's not normal." You know, if they're like, "Oh,
Yeah.
I have really bad cramps." I'm like, "How bad are they? Like are they impacting your like are they impacting your life? Or is it impossible for you to do things that you should be able to do because that's not normal?" And so
Yeah.
I started talking about it more and then I did get some reactions like, "Oh, I I couldn't even tell. Like I wouldn't even know that you have a chronic illness. I wouldn't know that you feel like you're dying today and you're
Yeah.
here."
Because we, for so many years, just put on this, like,
Hmm.
fake it till you make it. And sometimes people are like, oh, you said you didn't feel good yesterday, but today I see you out, like, doing things. Like, yeah, exactly, it's unpredictable, you don't know how
Yeah.
day to day you're going to feel, which is hugely unknown. Uncertainty is a huge anxiety trigger for anyone, but when you don't know how your body's going to react every single day, how could it not be affecting you?
Yeah, and that was something that I talked about in therapy too. Like I said, like it's not rational. Like one day I can be out hiking 10 miles and then the next week I can't walk. Like I physically it hurts to walk.
Yeah.
So, how does that make sense? How does that make sense to other people? But also, how does that make sense to ourselves when we're trying to
Hmm.
deal with this and we're trying to stay positive and we're trying to be active? And then it just kind of takes us down and you can't do anything. And
Yeah.
that, like, for your mind to try to comprehend that, I think is such a hard thing.
Yeah, for sure. Have you learned any other, like, has your therapist given any other good, like, just for people listening, maybe, I like that you say it's an irrational disease. Like, that is actually, I've never heard that. That's resonating with me, and I'm gonna think that way when I think about it. Are any other, like, kind of tips or tactics that you've been doing that have helped you feel better?
I think I just, like, that was a huge one for me. I
Yeah.
think that was like a big realization. I think that was kind of like a, like a glass shattering in my mind. I was like, oh,
Hmm.
that was huge for me.
Yeah.
But then also just like I just try to when I am in a flare up or I am feeling like low physically, I really try to think to myself like this is gonna pass. Like I've been through
Hmm.
this before and then I come out of it. And I think before I would just spiral and I wasn't able to grasp onto that. But I honestly think just talking about it is what really helped with that. Because when I wasn't talking about it, I just kept it all in my mind and it was all messed up. And then now that it was a big release for me.
Hmm.
Now that I've sort of released it, I just feel like I don't get into that same spiraling mindset.
I think that's a great tip for people, and even or journaling or writing about it, or
Yeah.
sometimes I would record on my phone, like I would be like crying and being like, why do I have, and just getting it out though, and like I would just record a voice note on my phone. I don't know why it made me feel better. And then one thing for me was I still struggle with this, but I'm a lot better. I wouldn't ask for help. So like
Mhm.
if you have someone with you, hey, can you grab my heating pad? Get your creature comforts, like get in your bed, watch a movie, get your heating pad, like, but ask for help. And I would never do it. I would like crawl to the microwave to heat up my heating pad instead of asking the able bodied person who lived in my house to help me because I didn't want to burden them. That helped me too, of just like saying, raising my hand and saying, I need help, which I really struggled with.
Yeah, me too for sure. I also struggle with that. I could be like curled up in pain and I'm like, I'm gonna go get my own Tylenol. But it's like, why am I doing that? Like, I don't need to
Yeah.
force my body to do that when there's somebody else that is willing to do it, even though I maybe don't want to ask them to. But when you were talking about writing stuff down, that reminded me too. I do like I have a page in my journal that says like it's like thoughts for when I'm in a flare up or something, and it's like positive things. It's like, this is gonna pass. Like, you can do this, you are loved. And just so it's because it's really hard. You can get into a really
Mhm.
negative space.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other way, and I love those, and the other thing that I try to think about too, which I'm still not the best at, is if this was your best friend,
Mm-hmm.
what would you say to them, and pretend that's you? You would be running. If it was my best friend who wasn't feeling well, I would be like, this is going to pass. You're going to be okay. I'm going to get your heating pad. Let me get you some water. You would, you would take care of that person. So treat yourself the same way you would treat someone you love. And
Mm-hmm.
that's something I try to think about things like that way. Like I would never say, you're never going to get better. You're not worthy. Like all of those things that sometimes we say to ourselves, you would never say that to someone that you cared about. So I try to think that way as well. Like to just like, how would I treat someone who I really love that was going through this, and then treat myself that way.
Mm-hmm.
So we're
Yeah,
so
I
hard
think
on ourselves.
I know we are. I think just in regards to therapy and talking about it, I think it's okay if you're not ready to talk about it, but it could help you a lot to talk about it.
Mhm.
That's how I felt after. And I went, you know, I sort of felt like I was talking about the same things over and over again in therapy because it was basically all about my endometriosis because that was really what was messing with my mental health. Um, but I think saying those things repeatedly was what I needed because I needed to be able to vent them out and get them out there into the world instead of just in my mind.
Yeah, you needed a release.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
And that's okay to like repeat things. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like you said, it was 10 years of stored up emotion and fear and just all of the things that you deal with on the mental health side. I'm so grateful that you brought that up because I do think there's so many layers to having this disease that there's so many like parts of the onion we have to peel back. And like you said, if you're not ready, that's okay too, but it may actually really 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 help. So that I, like I said, with that journal, I wasn't ready to start writing in it, and I actually had kind of a moment similar where someone was like, are you, they're like, you have this podcast, are you dealing with your, and I was like, that was a really tough conversation for me. And I was like, you're right, like I need to deal with all I've been through with this disease. And so I started journaling finally.
Yeah, and I think it's important too that people that, maybe are just diagnosed or maybe they're not ready to talk about it, to know that these are thoughts that a lot of us are having that have
Mhm.
endometriosis. A lot of, like, you've talked about it on the podcast before, before surgery, you think, oh, am I just making it up? Is it going to be verified during surgery? And then it's just a lot of us have these thoughts. Is it going to affect my fertility? And you're worried about that. Why is this happening to me? Those are normal thoughts for you to feel and have. And they're big emotions and they're big thoughts that need to be processed. And if you need help to process them, that is okay. And that
Yeah.
is why therapists are there. They're there to help you through these things, and you don't need to sit with that all by yourself. And there are other people that feel that way, and we'll talk to you about it too, but you always have that
One,
option.
yeah. You're never alone. You're never,
Never.
ever
And
alone.
I think when I started listening to this podcast, that was a huge thing for me. The first time I heard you say that on your podcast, you're not alone, I was like, oh my God, I'm not alone. Like, because it is very isolating. It's a very isolating illness. And especially when the people around you maybe can't understand it and they don't know what you're going through.
Yeah.
Because even we don't have the same experiences with endometriosis because everyone is so different. And so we can help, like, we can relate in a way that other people can't, but it's still isolating. You still feel like you're the only one that is having these exact feelings.
Couldn't agree more. And that's why I love that there's so many communities and, like you said, social media and Instagram now, because you can find someone maybe not exactly the same as what you're going through, but a similar scenario. And I do feel like endo patients just have this instant click, like where you could say I need help and 10 people would be willing to just jump in and help you. So that is the such a nice thing about like the internet. I sound so old, but like social media and things like that, it's just easier to connect with people who understand. But I agree with you too. Having an unbiased third party, just therapist that you can just let it all out to is really incredible, to just air it. Like you said, just like get it off your chest. Yeah,
Yeah, even
for
if, and
sure.
and my therapist didn't know what endometriosis was. And so that was a cool moment for me, honestly, was, that's another person now knows what endometriosis was and now has that experience from speaking with me, so that if another patient comes into her practice that has endometriosis, she now knows what it is and she has an idea of how it may impact someone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. 100%. That you having that conversation with her will change other people's lives, because I'm assuming I said her. I assumed your therapist
Yeah,
was her, but I shouldn't have. That your
she is.
therapist. Okay. Regardless of that will now be able to support, or maybe someone's coming in and they're just saying, I feel sick all the time. She has that awareness that she may be able to help them. So just like
Yeah.
that teacher who helped you, I mean, that's why telling our stories, if you're ready, is so important, and being open and honest with yourself and other people it helps. It's a movement, like it's like forward progress for all of us when we open up about how challenging this disease is.
Yeah, and it's even, I think I like to think that having endometriosis so young and experiencing it from such a young age has made me really empathetic for other people that are going through something similar. And
Mhm.
so even if it's not endometriosis, even if it's another chronic illness, it's I feel like, oh, I can relate. I understand that you don't feel good all the time because
Mhm.
that's how I feel sometimes. And even going back to my therapist now, she has an understanding, or some understanding of what someone with a chronic illness may think, even if it's not endometriosis. If it could be another chronic illness, but that person is living with that chronic illness diagnosis, and maybe they haven't confronted that mental for their own mental health either.
Yes. 100%. 100%. I feel the same way. It's made me more empathetic just in life to my
Mm-hmm.
staff, and
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely opened my eyes to everybody has something going on behind closed doors. And that's why it's just listen and be kind and be available for humans. Like that's
Yeah.
just, it's really taught me that.
Yeah, that's how people are always saying, like, you have no idea what somebody is going through. Like, you have
Yeah.
no idea. And endometriosis is not the only invisible illness.
Mm-mm.
So you could know someone. Well, first of all, you could know someone with endo, and you likely do. And maybe
Yeah.
they're not ready to talk about it, or maybe they don't know that they have it.
Mhm.
But you could also know someone with another invisible illness and you have no idea what they're going through. And so it's just really important to be empathetic for other people because you really don't know what they're going through.
100%. 100% agree. This has been really important conversation, and I really appreciate you being open and honest about it. Is there anything else that you want to add or that we missed? How are you feeling now, just as we wrap up here?
I'm like I feel pretty good now. Like I said, I that dull ache that I always had went away and it hasn't come back. But that's one of the big fears too, I think, for a lot of people with endo that do have surgery and it does help their pain is you sort of have this constant fear in the back of your mind that it's gonna come back. Cause
Yeah.
and that's like sometimes I'll get because also with endo, new symptoms pop up sometimes and you're like, oh fun. And so sometimes I'll get a pain that feels a little different and I'm like, is it gonna come back? And so yeah, that's always that's always a thing that we have to think about. Unfortunately, is the pain going to come back? Is it going to get worse? But I think that I've been working really hard to accept the fact that that is a possibility, and a lot of people do have multiple surgeries, and that could be something that I have to do later on in my own path. But right now, I'm okay, and I think also a big part of that too was that I got to switch to a remote job, and so now I don't run my body ragged all the time, and I get
Hmm.
to if I have a flare up, I can work from bed, or I can work all I have to do is roll a bed and go to my desk, and
Yeah.
that's actually something that I remember saying that to my therapist, like I don't think that I can do this, like I don't think I can work like this for that much longer, like I need a job where I can sit all day long or that's more accommodating to my
Yeah.
symptoms or my body at certain times.
Absolutely. It's a very important point. Yeah, for sure.
Which is, I know, that's not accessible for everyone. And we've
Yeah.
been there in the service industry and so we know what you're going through.
Yeah. And asking your employer
Mm-hmm.
in this, if you are in the service industry, or letting them know, maybe you don't tell them exactly what's going on, but you say, I am dealing with something. Can I have an accommodation? Is there some sort of accommodation that you can provide? Is something you can at least ask if you feel comfortable doing it. I never did that, but if I, what I know now, if I knew then, always, I probably would have said, like, I need a couple days in the back office or something, just to help accommodate not being on the retail floor.
Yeah, and I think
So,
one thing that I'd like to reiterate is just you're not alone. And I really needed to hear that. And I know that there's somebody out there that also really needs to hear that, and you're not alone.
yeah, absolutely. You're not alone in your thoughts and feelings. And, you brought up the point of, like, every time you have a new pain or a new symptom, just that fear, it almost like triggers a fear. And people hear me say this all the time, but that I used to get in those spirals. I would have like a pain on my right side. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have a cyst. What's happening? Do I have endo? What's going on? Is my endo flaring all over the place? Is it back everywhere after surgery? And I really just started to, like, okay, I have to just take it day by day, because then that pain might be gone tomorrow. And I'm in this just spiral of stress and anxiety. And so I sometimes take it minute by minute. Like, you just, like, try not to go into this. Easier said than done, since I'm someone who
Mm-hmm.
spirals, used to spiral all the time too. But take it day by day, minute by minute, hour by hour, see how you feel. And that's the best way, instead of, like, just going to the extreme, which is what I used to do all the time and still
Mm-hmm.
sometimes do.
Yeah, and it's
So,
okay, but we sometimes do that. We're all working to accept that this is our lives, that we have this chronic illness and it's not always
yeah,
positive and there are days that you feel down about it and that's perfectly fine.
it's 100% normal and fine. And sometimes sitting with those emotions, it's okay. It's okay to say this sucks and this is really
Mhm.
hard and this isn't fair. That's
Mhm.
okay because
Mhm.
it's all of those things are true.
Mhm.
But then the next day, feeling a little better, pick up and keep going. So, okay, good. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting with us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.
Good. Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed it. And I think you brought up, a lot of very, very good points. And I really appreciate you being vulnerable and really honest on the show. All right.